The snow was already swallowing my boots when I opened my eyes, but I could not feel a single thing below my knees. At first, I thought I was dreaming because the world looked soft and slow, like someone had pressed a mute button on Fort Drum itself. The barracks building towered above me, its second-floor window glowing with a faint yellow light that blurred through the falling snow. I tried to lift my hand, but even that felt heavy, as if someone had replaced my bones with ice. My breath came out in short, uneven clouds. I tasted metal. I tasted fear. Then I remembered the voice. His voice. Alex. My stepfather stood at that window only minutes earlier, his outline framed by the room I thought I would be safe in simply because the Army called it federal property. I could still hear him, even though he was long gone. "Why did you come home, Marissa? You embarrass this family." Those words hit harder than the fall. Even now, they echoed in the cold. It was Christmas week. Every soldier who could leave Fort Drum had left. The base was quiet in that eerie way that only military installations can be when the world beyond the gate is celebrating. But I was on the duty roster for the holiday, and part of me was relieved because it meant I could avoid the house I grew up, in the house where Alex ran the air like a dictator. Still, my mother asked me to visit even for an hour. Guilt pulled me harder than the snow chains on my truck tires, so I went. 1 hour. That was all I promised myself. The dinner had been civil at first. Alex put on his holiday charm for his relatives. He bragged about me, even though he had never supported my enlistment. "Look at her," he told everyone, wearing sergeant stripes like she runs the country. The moment the last guest left, the atmosphere changed. He mocked the Army. He mocked my career. He mocked my last injury during field training. He got louder each time I stayed silent, and when he finally leaned in too close, I grabbed my coat and walked out. I should have driven straight back to post and locked my door. I should have ignored his calls. But Alex hated being ignored. He followed me in his truck, and I did not see it until I parked in front of Barracks Building 102. At first, he shouted from the sidewalk, demanding that I stop walking. Then he crossed the snow-covered grass and forced himself inside the common room right behind me. I did not think he would actually follow me into a building on a military base. I did not think he would step into a second-floor hallway behind a soldier who outranked half the people on duty that night. I definitely did not think he would put his hands on me. I had my back near the window, the glass already frosted from the cold outside. The argument rose and fell like waves, each one colder than the last. He said the Army had turned me arrogant. He said I had abandoned my mother. He said I thought I was untouchable. When I told him to leave or I would call the MPs, his face shifted into something I had seen only a few times in my life. Something dangerous. "If you walk away, you are dead to this family." The words sliced through the room. I stepped back, wanting distance. My boot heel touched the radiator beneath the window. He moved forward fast. Too fast. A shove, a blur of panic, a cracking sound as the frame shook. Then nothing but white rushing past my eyes. I do not remember the exact second I hit the snow. I just remember the color draining out of the sky. I remember trying to shout, but the cold stole my voice. My phone was out of reach somewhere in the snow behind me. My limbs were turning numb. The frost crawled up my legs like a second skin. I told myself to stay awake. I told myself to breathe. I told myself that soldiers do not quit. But the cold felt patient. Almost gentle. It whispered that sleep would be easier. A faint shape appeared near the window above. Someone pulling the curtain closed. Alex. He did not look down at me. He simply shut the world out and left. My heartbeat slowed. My thoughts scattered. I remembered basic training. I remembered the mountain rucks at 4 a.m. I remembered how proud I felt pinning on my sergeant rank. I remembered my mother trying to smile through years of tension. And then there was nothing but snow. Snow and silence. Until I heard a distant engine. Tires sliding. A voice cutting through the wind calling my name. But that part comes later. For now, there was only the cold, the night, and the truth that I might not make it to sunrise. Life at Fort Drum in December has a rhythm that feels different from any other month because the cold shapes every decision you make from the second you step outside your door. For me, that door belonged to Barracks Building 102, a long rectangular block of aging brick that creaked in the wind and echoed with boots during the work week, but went nearly silent during the holidays. As a sergeant in the S1 shop, I was used to routine precision. I woke before sunrise, ran the admin roster, processed leave forms, briefed the company on personnel changes, and answered questions from soldiers who needed guidance on everything from promotions to emergency leave. I liked the order. I liked the sense that if I kept every folder clean and every file squared away, I could manage the chaos that people carried into my office. The Army gave me structure, and structure had become the closest thing I had to safety. Being competent in S1 was not glamorous, but it meant people trusted me. And in a life where I had grown up tiptoeing around moods and tension, that trust felt like a reward. When holiday duty assignments were posted in early December, my name showed up on the roster. Some soldiers groaned about staying on post, but I exhaled a quiet relief. Staying in the barracks meant I would not have to drive to my childhood home and pretend that our family celebrated Christmas the way movies and commercials insisted families were supposed to. It meant I could avoid the sharp edge in my stepfather Alex's tone whenever he talked about my career. Still, he called. The first call came 3 days before Christmas. He asked if I planned to come home. His voice sounded smooth on the surface, but I recognized the pressure behind it. He never asked a question without expecting the answer he wanted. I said I was on duty. He said duty did not matter because holidays were for family. I told him I could not leave post for long. He told me that was an excuse. The second call came the next day, then a text, then another. He had a gift for flipping frustration into guilt almost effortlessly. He reminded me that my mother missed me and that relatives wanted to see me and that I was always too busy with the Army to show up for the people who raised me. It was the kind of line he had used for years, and even though I was 27 years old and wore a rank he had never respected, it still struck something inside me, a mixture of fatigue and old training, the familiar feeling of shrinking myself to keep the peace. When I mentioned his messages to one of my fellow NCOs, she shrugged in that knowing way people in the military do when family expectations clash with service obligations. She said families assume a soldier with stripes must have money, stability, and free time. They do not see the overnight duty shifts, the last-minute taskings, the field rotations, or the emotional weight that comes with the job. She said it kindly, but it stayed with me. She was right. The more I succeeded in uniform, the more Alex seemed determined to remind me that nothing I achieved really counted. Christmas Eve fell on a Saturday that year. Snow had been falling steadily since dawn, the kind of snowfall that muffles sound and makes the whole installation feel wrapped in cotton. I spent the morning answering messages from soldiers finalizing a leave request and checking in with the duty NCO. By midday, the building felt hollow. Most of the residents had gone home for the week. Only a few of us remained, and the silence gave me too much space to think. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. It was Alex. He wrote that he expected me at the house by 5 because relatives were arriving early. I stared at the message for a long moment. My stomach tightened. I wanted to ignore it, but I knew the pattern. Ignoring him never worked. Ignoring him simply escalated what would come later. So I asked my platoon sergeant for permission to step out for a couple of hours. He approved it with a wave of his hand because holiday passes were common and I rarely asked for anything. He even smiled and told me to grab dinner somewhere warm because the storm advisory predicted temperatures dropping fast after sunset. I nodded, thanked him, and hoped the warning would not become symbolic. I drove off post, thinking I would make a brief appearance at the house, say hello to my mother, endure whatever performance Alex decided to put on for extended family, then leave before the atmosphere soured. That was the plan. Simple as that. A short visit to avoid conflict. The truth was, I had spent most of my life adjusting myself around Alex's moods, and I had learned how to predict the storms that came with them. What I had not learned was how to stop believing I owed him anything. Even wearing a uniform, even being responsible for other soldiers, even holding a position where people trusted my judgment, I still felt the tug of that old script every time he spoke. You embarrass this family. You think you are better than us. You only wear that rank to hide who you really are. Words that seemed small but cut deep because they came from someone who should have encouraged me, or at the very least left me alone. I left Fort Drum that afternoon, trying to convince myself the visit would be quick. I convinced myself that my mother would be relieved to see me and that maybe Alex would behave long enough that nothing would happen. I convinced myself that I would be back in the safety of Building 102 before the snow turned dangerous. I had no idea that the same building I relied on for routine and protection would become the place where the last line between my past and my present shattered. I also had no idea that the cold waiting for me later was not just weather, but the final lesson I needed to stop letting Alex decide who I was allowed to be. I was 14 the year Alex moved into our house, and the air inside those walls changed almost immediately. Before him, my mother and I lived in a quiet rhythm that felt fragile but manageable. After him, every room felt smaller and every conversation felt like a test I could fail without warning. Alex was the kind of man who needed control the way some people need oxygen. He wanted every chair pushed and every cupboard closed, every opinion softened until it fit the outline he approved. At first, he tried to win me over with compliments that sounded rehearsed. He told my mother I just needed guidance. He told relatives I was a good kid who would benefit from a firmer hand. But when the softness did not work, he switched to something sharper. The first time he criticized the Army, I did not understand why he cared so much. My uncle had served. My grandfather had served. I had grown up listening to deployment stories at family barbecues and watching the pride in their eyes whenever a new generation raised a hand and took the oath. But Alex bristled at uniforms. He claimed they represented everything he despised: authority, discipline, sacrifice. He had never served but acted as though he had survived battles no one else knew about. When I mentioned wanting to enlist after high school, he laughed. Not a warm laugh, but one that hit like a slap. He told me girls like me did not belong in the military. He said the Army would chew me up and spit me out. He said only people running from something ended up signing those papers. I remember the way my mother watched that exchange. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again when Alex looked at her. That was the first moment I realized her silence was not agreement, but fear. My desire to join the Army did not fade just because Alex raised his voice. If anything, his resistance made the idea more urgent. The more he mocked the possibility, the more I wanted to prove him wrong. But he made sure the road to that dream was full of obstacles. He hid my recruitment brochures. He ripped up my early application forms. He told my school counselor I was unstable and needed time to think before making big decisions. He framed each interference as concern, but it was not concern. It was ownership. He wanted control over the narrative of my life, and the idea of me wearing a uniform challenged that control. He treated my mother even worse. She tried to stand up to him occasionally, but each attempt ended the same. A raised voice, a slammed door, a silence that lasted for days. She learned to apologize first, even when she had done nothing wrong. She learned to walk softly. She learned to choose words the way a soldier chooses steps in a minefield. She relied on him financially and emotionally until dependency shaped her days. Watching her shrink taught me exactly what future I refused to live. In our house, emotions were currency, and Alex controlled the supply. If I did well in school, he claimed the credit. If I disagreed with him, he turned it into disrespect. If I succeeded outside the house, he called it luck. When I earned my driver license, he said I would never use it responsibly. When I made honor roll, he said I only achieved it because teachers liked compliant students. When I made friends, he said they only wanted something from me. Nothing was ever mine without his commentary. The closer I got to adulthood, the more his behavior sharpened. He resented any independence I gained. He checked my phone without permission. He counted minutes when I left the house. He criticized my clothing, claiming he wanted to protect me from the world, but really he wanted to limit every inch I stepped away from him. Through all this, my mother tried to keep the peace, but she was trapped in her own exhausting cycle of soothing his temper before it turned destructive. She tried to warn me in her own quiet way. When I mentioned the Army again during my senior year, she squeezed my hand so tightly her fingers trembled. She whispered that I needed to be careful how I told him. At that moment, I realized she was not telling me to be careful for my sake. She was telling me to be careful for hers. The night I finally enlisted without his permission, he erupted. He accused me of betraying the family. He accused me of choosing strangers over my own blood. He said the Army would fill my head with lies and make me think I was better than everyone at home. I stood there clutching my enlistment contract and for the first time saw him clearly. A man terrified of anything he could not dominate. A man threatened by the possibility that I could build a life he could not control. When I left for basic training, my mother hugged me at the bus station and whispered that she hoped the Army would give me what she never had: courage, distance, a chance to breathe. Alex stayed in the car engine running, glaring through the windshield as if I owed him an apology. During training, when the days were long and the nights felt heavier than my ruck, I pushed through because I refused to let him be right about me. I earned my stripes despite every obstacle he tried to place in my way. I built a career that was mine, not his. But no matter how far I rose in rank or how many responsibilities I took on, his voice still lingered in the background. "The Army made you think you are better than us." He said it through clenched teeth whenever he thought I was getting too confident. As if confidence was a flaw, as if ambition was an attack on him. Over time, those words became less about me and more about him. They revealed how deeply he feared losing his grip on a family he had ruled for years. Each promotion I earned, each skill I mastered, each boundary I set reminded him that fear and his response to that fear shaped both of our lives long before the night he followed me into my barracks building, long before the window, long before the snow. The drive to my mother's house felt longer than usual, even though the distance from Fort Drum to Watertown was barely 20 minutes. The snow thickened as I turned into the neighborhood where I grew up, a row of narrow houses pressed shoulder to shoulder under sagging holiday lights. For a moment, I sat in the truck, staring at the familiar porch, the worn railings, the glow from the kitchen window. It should have felt like home, but it only reminded me of years spent calculating my tone and my footsteps. Still, my mother had asked, and I could not ignore the sound of her voice when she said she missed me. When I stepped inside, the heat from the living room rushed over me. Christmas music played from a small speaker on the counter, and the smell of roasting ham drifted through the hallway. My mother hurried toward me, arms open, her expression bright with relief. For a few seconds, I allowed myself to relax. She held me tightly as if she could keep me there just by the strength of her embrace. Then Alex appeared. He walked in with the same swagger he always carried when guests were present. He spread his arms and announced to the room that his soldier had finally arrived. His voice boomed louder than necessary. Several relatives turned smiling wide as they approached to shake my hand. I recognized some of them from childhood holidays, but most were people who rarely visited, except when Alex needed an audience. He began introducing me like I was a trophy he kept on a shelf. "This is Marissa Hale, my stepdaughter. She serves in the Army. Sergeant now. We are very proud." The words tasted false coming from him, and I knew he enjoyed the spotlight more than any genuine pride he pretended to have. He urged me to tell stories about my job, but when I kept my answers brief, he filled in the gaps with exaggerated versions that made him sound involved in my success. My mother stood near the dining table, wringing her hands, her smile strained. She knew this script as well as I did. Dinner began politely enough. People asked about Fort Drum, about the cold, about military life. I kept the details light, hoping the evening would pass without the shift I dreaded. But the shift always came. It began with a comment from one of Alex's friends, a man named Curtis, who had been circling the living room with a beer in hand. He leaned back in his chair and smirked. "So, Marissa, tell me, was your injury last year even real, or just Army drama?" I froze. The table grew quiet. My lower back tightened with the familiar pulse of pain from the training accident he referred to. Before I could answer, Alex laughed in a tone that cut sharper than the question. "She likes to exaggerate things," he said. "They all do in that uniform. You would think she fought off an army of enemies the way she talks." I stared at him. I had never claimed anything dramatic. I had simply recovered and gone back to work. But he was not interested in facts. He was interested in control, and humiliation was one of his favorite tools. His friend continued. "Bet she wears those stripes like armor, too. Probably walks around base thinking no one can touch her." Alex clapped his hand against the table and leaned forward, eyes bright with something cold. "You think wearing stripes makes you untouchable?" The words echoed in my chest like a memory returning from basic training the day a drill sergeant told us that rank meant responsibility, not superiority. But Alex twisted it into something venomous. My mother tried to redirect the conversation by offering dessert, but Alex continued as if nothing she said mattered. He criticized the army again, calling it a place where people hid from real life. He questioned my decisions. He questioned my loyalty. He questioned why I had not visited more often. The relatives who had been laughing earlier now stared at their plates, avoiding eye contact. Curtis chuckled under his breath. The shift had happened. The thin layer of politeness covering the evening peeled away, and the house reverted to the atmosphere I had grown up in. Something inside me snapped into clarity. Not fear, but a kind of exhaustion that felt old and heavy. I stood up from the table. My mother looked at me with wide, worried eyes. "Marissa." "Stay for dessert," she whispered. "Please." I shook my head gently and touched her shoulder. I promised myself the visit would be short, and I needed to honor that promise. Being in that house felt like stepping backward into a version of myself I no longer recognized. Alex pushed away from the table and rose with a mocking grin. "Leaving already?" I said nothing. I grabbed my coat and headed toward the door. As I stepped into the cold night air, the snow hit my face like a warning. I heard the front door swing open behind me. Alex's voice chased me down the walkway. Typical. Always running, always thinking the uniform makes you better. I turned just enough to see him standing in the porch light, his face tight with disdain. My mother hovered behind him, powerless to intervene. I wanted to tell her I loved her. I wanted to tell her I would be back another day when he was not there. But I knew that day might never come unless something changed. The snow crunched under my boots as I climbed into my truck and shut the door. The engine hummed the headlights cut through the falling flakes, and for a brief moment I felt safe again. I looked back at the house one last time. It stood there glowing from the windows, warm on the outside, but filled with a familiar cold I no longer wanted to carry. I drove away with a clarity that settled deep inside me. I was done bending myself to survive someone else's storm. I was done pretending that dinner tables were safer than barracks hallways. What I did not know then was that the night would twist into something far darker than a ruined holiday dinner. I did not know that Alex would not let my departure be the end of it. I did not know that he would follow me back to post and drag the past into the present in a way that would nearly cost me everything. The drive back to Fort Drum should have felt like a release, but my shoulders remained tight long after my mother's house disappeared in the rearview mirror. The storm had grown heavier and the wipers dragged across the windshield in tired arcs. I replayed the dinner in my mind, the laughter that died too quickly, the looks from relatives who pretended not to notice the hostility under every word Alex spoke, and the tremble in my mother's hands when she hugged me goodbye. By the time I reached the main gate, the security lights cut through the falling snow, and I felt the first breath of relief settle in my chest. The sentry on duty scanned my ID, nodded, and waved me through. The familiar rhythm of the installation replaced the chaos of my childhood home. Even buried under snow, Fort Drum had an order I trusted. I turned toward Building 102, expecting silence, expecting the night to end without any more confrontations. But when I parked near the walkway that led to the barracks entrance, headlights swept across my rear window. A truck stopped too close behind me. My pulse jumped. I recognized the outline of the vehicle instantly. Alex. I had not even heard him behind me on the highway. He stepped out, slamming the door with more force than necessary. Snowflakes clung to his jacket. His movements were unsteady, fueled by anger and the drinks he had been pouring for himself during dinner. I stayed inside my truck for a moment, gripping the steering wheel as he walked up to my door. He knocked hard and bent down to meet my eyes through the glass. "Open the door, Marissa. We need to finish talking." I rolled the window down only an inch. "There is nothing left to talk about. Go home." His jaw clenched. "You do not get to walk out on me like that. You embarrassed your mother. You embarrassed me." I almost laughed. After everything he had said that night, he was the one who felt embarrassed. I rolled the window up and stepped out of the truck, keeping distance between us. I turned toward the barracks door, hoping he would not dare follow, but Alex hated silence more than anything. He grabbed the handle and forced his way inside right behind me. Building 102 was old, the kind of barracks that predated modern access controls. The first floor common area was empty, dimly lit by a single fluorescent light near the vending machines. A stairwell in the corner led to the second floor where my room and the shared common room were located. I climbed the stairs quickly, hoping he would lose his nerve. Instead, his footsteps followed, each one louder than the last. On the second floor, the hallway was quiet, lined with doors leading to rooms vacated for holiday leave. The common room at the end of the hall was dark except for the faint glow of an outdoor security lamp bleeding through the frosted window. I stepped inside to put more space between us, but Alex entered immediately and shut the door with a thud that made the walls shake. He stood near the entrance, breathing hard snow melting on his shoes and dripping into small puddles on the linoleum floor. "What is wrong with you?" he demanded. "Why do you always leave when things get real?" I crossed my arms to steady myself. "I do not owe you that explanation. You need to leave the base. Now." His laugh was sharp and ugly. "You think you can tell me what to do just because you are wearing stripes. You think this rank means anything in the real world." It was the same argument, but now the room was small and the door was shut, and his anger crackled like electricity. I moved toward the window without realizing it, instinctively seeking distance. The glass was icy to the touch when my hand brushed the frame. Snow outside swirled in heavy gusts. He stepped forward. I stepped back again. The cold leaking through the window frame crept up my spine. I kept my voice level. "Alex, this is a federal installation. You cannot be here. Leave or I will call the MPs." His face twisted. "Call them. Then you can explain why you treat your own family like garbage." His voice rose. "You walk around acting like you are better than everyone. Acting like you are untouchable." I shook my head. "I am not having this conversation." I turned slightly enough for him to see me disengaging, enough to trigger the part of him that could not tolerate losing control. His voice dropped to a low fury. "If you walk away, you are dead to this family." The sentence hit with the weight of years, a threat wrapped in the tone I remembered all too well. I did not flinch. I reached for my phone. That was when he lunged. His hand slammed against my shoulder. Not a slap, but a full-force shove powered by the alcohol and rage he carried like a second skin. My back hit the frosted glass. For a split second, the world froze. Then the frame gave way with a crack that sounded like ice splitting on a lake. The cold night exploded around me. I felt weightlessness, a terrifying upward pull in my stomach as the world tilted. Then gravity claimed me. Snow rushed toward my face like a white wall. The impact knocked the air from my lungs. Pain flared, then dimmed, then spread in slow waves. I tried to move, but my limbs felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else. Above me, the broken window flickered with yellow light. The curtain shifted. A shadow moved behind it. Alex. He pulled the fabric closed with a calmness that punched through the fog in my mind. He did not shout for help. He did not look down. He simply shut the world out and walked away. Snow gathered in my hair and around my neck. The cold seeped through every layer of my clothing. The base was silent. The wind was the only witness. My breath came shallow and uneven. Pain radiated through my ribs and back. I blinked, trying to stay awake, but the night blurred into white, and the cold crept nearer the way predators do silent, patient certain. That was the moment I realized I was completely alone. The first few seconds after the fall felt strangely distant, as if my mind could not accept that the impact had already happened. I lay on my back, staring at the sky, while snowflakes drifted down in slow, gentle spirals, so peaceful that for a moment I wondered if I was merely lying in the barracks courtyard after a long shift. Then, the cold pierced through the shock. It struck my legs first, a deep sting that crawled upward with steady determination. The snow beneath me compressed into a frozen mold around my body. The thin layer of warmth trapped in my clothing vanished almost instantly. I tried to reach for my phone, but my hand sank into the snow and came up empty. My pocket had torn during the fall. The device was somewhere out of reach, buried in the powder. I whispered a curse under my breath and tried again to move, but my limbs responded like they were underwater. My breath puffed out in quick bursts that faded before I could fully exhale. I tilted my head to see the trail I had carved into the snow. A few scattered footprints marked where Alex had stood before he yanked the curtain closed. The sight made my pulse spike. The base was silent. No soldiers walked by. No vehicles rolled through the nearby lot. The storm had driven everyone indoors, and holiday leave had emptied half the barracks. I tried lifting my right arm again. Pain burned up my shoulder. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to breathe slowly. Basic training had taught me that panic made everything worse, but training had not prepared me for this kind of cold. It crawled up from his ground, slipping under my coat, sliding beneath my neckline, gripping every nerve until the sting dulled into numbness. The numbness scared me more than the pain. Pain meant I was still fighting. Numbness meant the cold was winning. My thoughts wandered in slow, drifting loops. I saw the face of my first drill sergeant, the way he shouted about grit during winter rucks at 3 in the morning. I remembered the weight of my ruck as we trudged through snow, the burn in my thighs, the frost collecting on eyelashes. Back then, I had believed I understood cold. This was different. This was personal. The wind cut across my face like something with intent. It found the small gaps between scarf and skin. It sliced across my cheeks and numbed my lips until I could barely speak. I tried to call out, but my voice was small, swallowed by the storm. My heart pounded, but the rhythm felt uneven, too slow for the panic buzzing beneath it. I tried rolling onto my side, but the attempt drained more strength than I expected. A sharp ache bloomed across my ribs. I froze, afraid another movement might make things worse. Time blurred. Minutes passed like drifting shadows. I forced myself to stay awake by naming Army values in my head, one by one, a grounding exercise we had used in training when exhaustion threatened to swallow us. Loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. By the time I reached the last one, courage felt like something distant, a word someone else had earned. My eyelids grew heavy. The wind hissed between the barracks buildings. Somewhere in the distance, a snowplow scraped across pavement, but it felt miles away. My body trembled violently at first, then gradually the shivering slowed. I knew enough about winter injuries to understand that slowing shivers were not a good sign. The cold was slipping past the point my body could fight. I pressed my fingertips against the snow, trying to feel something. Anything. They barely responded. My breathing became shallow. My chest felt tight as if the cold was pressing down from above. Darkness pooled at the edges of my vision. And then I saw her. My mother. Not as she had been during dinner, anxious and small beneath Alex's presence, but as she had been years ago before everything hardened. Her silhouette appeared near the edge of the courtyard, soft and glowing like a memory-given shape. Her voice drifted through the wind, faint but clear enough to reach me. "Marissa, do not sleep." The sound hit me with such force I gasped. I blinked hard, trying to stay anchored to the world. Her figure flickered in and out like a candle flame. I knew she was not really there. I knew it was my brain clinging to something familiar as the cold drained my strength. But even as an illusion, her presence steadied me. "Do not sleep." I repeated the words silently. My body wanted to let go. My mind refused. Snow danced across my eyelashes. I swallowed and tried lifting my head again. The world swayed. I sank back down. My core temperature must have dropped further because clarity dissolved into long stretches of fog. Little bursts of consciousness came and went. I remembered a deployment training rotation in Louisiana where heat exhaustion left a soldier fainting in the mud. I remembered telling myself I would never be the one needing rescue. I remembered Alex's face at the dinner table, the way his eyes gleamed when he felt power. I remembered the shove, the window, the fall. My breath rattled in my throat. I tried to wiggle my toes and felt nothing. My legs had gone numb completely. Fear gnawed at me, but the numbness made it hard to react fully. The cold carried a strange softness with it, a whisper that suggested surrender would be easier than fighting. Another wave of drowsiness swept over me. I forced my eyes open wide. I tried to think of anything loud, anything warm, anything that could pull me back. My mother's voice came again. Do not sleep, Marissa. Stay awake. A full hour must have passed by then. Maybe more. My thoughts no longer formed in clean lines. They spilled. They drifted. I could not tell if I was blinking or losing consciousness. The snow fell harder. The lights from the barracks blurred into halos. The world narrowed into one choice: breathe or fade. Breathe or fade. I clung to the first choice even as the second one seemed more merciful. But the cold kept creeping, and somewhere in the distance, something inside me whispered that time was running out. The world had shrunk into a dim tunnel by the time the sound of an engine broke through the wind. At first, I thought it was another illusion, another trick my exhausted mind created to keep me from slipping under, but the rumble grew louder, clearer, vibrating faintly through the snow beneath my body. Headlights cut through the storm in sharp white beams. A truck pulled into the lot between the two barracks buildings, tires sliding slightly on the iced pavement before coming to a stop. The driver door slammed. Boots crunched through the snow. I could not lift my head to see who it was, but the steps moved quickly, confident and familiar in a way that did not match the fear curling through my chest. The boots slowed, stopped. A voice sliced through the wind. Hail. Jesus. Hail! My eyes fluttered, struggling to focus. A dark silhouette knelt beside me. I recognized the outline before his face sharpened through the falling snow. Staff Sergeant Ramirez. He was assigned to Alpha Company, but his room was 5 doors down from mine on the second floor. He was rarely back early from anything. He had been at his family's for the holiday and was supposed to return the next morning. I later learned he had driven back early because the storm shifted and he did not want to be stuck on the interstate overnight. Any other timing and I would have died before sunrise. Ramirez leaned closer, brushing snow away from my face with quick, practiced motions. Hale, can you hear me? Stay awake. Talk to me. His voice sounded too loud in my ears, but also too distant, as if I were underwater and he was shouting from the surface. I tried to respond. The word staff barely formed before dissolving into a faint gasp. He cursed under his breath, sliding off his gloves and checking my pulse, then pressing 2 fingers against the side of my neck. Cold. Slow. He muttered something in Spanish, something tight and fearful, then yanked his radio from his belt. This is Staff Sergeant Ramirez requesting immediate medical response to Building 102 Courtyard. Possible hypothermia. Possible fall from height. Patient is unresponsive but breathing. Repeat, immediate response needed. His voice changed from fear to authority in seconds. Years of training hardening into instinct. He shouted toward the parking lot, hoping someone would hear, but the wind swallowed his words. He looked back at me, eyes scanning my limbs for visible fractures. Hale, stay with me. Do not close your eyes. Stay awake. I wanted to tell him I was trying. I wanted to tell him the cold was pulling me down faster than I could fight. But my voice barely existed. The snow around me glowed under the headlights from his truck, creating a halo of pale light that made the night feel unreal. Ramirez shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around my torso, tucking the edges under my arms to shield me from the wind. The sudden pressure of warmth made my chest ache. My body tried to shiver again, but the tremors were small and weak. That scared him more than anything else. He pressed the back of his hand against my cheek. Freezing. He grabbed his phone next. I heard him speaking rapidly, giving coordinates, describing the scene, urging medics to hurry, because the cold was turning lethal. The storm had thickened and the roads were slick. Every second stretched into something heavier. Ramirez leaned close again. Hale, listen to me. Look at me. Do not follow the cold. Do not drift. Focus on my voice. His breath hung in the air like steam. I tried to blink in response. My head tilted slightly. His eyes widened. Good. Good. That is it. Stay with me. The wind shifted and carried the distant echo of sirens. Ramirez exhaled in relief. MPs are coming. You are not alone. The sirens grew louder until blue and red lights bounced off the glass windows of the barracks. 2 military police patrol vehicles slid to a stop near the courtyard. Doors flew open. Boots pounded toward us. One MP knelt by my side while the other scanned the building, assessing the broken window on the second floor. the first MP leaned close and spoke firmly. "Sergeant Hale, can you hear me? Can you respond?" My lips parted. A faint whisper escaped. "My stepdad." The MP frowned and motioned for Ramirez to speak up. "What did she say?" Ramirez leaned in, listening for sound, then looked back at the MP. "She said stepdad." The MP lowered closer. "Sergeant, who else was here with you?" My throat burned as I tried again. "My stepdad." Pushed. The word scraped out like frost grinding against metal. The MP stiffened. He exchanged a quick look with the second officer who was already speaking into his shoulder radio. "Possible assault suspect leaving the area. Civilian male. Dispatched to check gate footage. Notify CID." The cold pressed harder against my ribs. My vision flickered. Ramirez kept one hand on my shoulder, grounding me, reminding me that help was close. Within moments, the medics arrived, rushing through the snow carrying equipment. They knelt beside me, assessing injuries, wrapping thermal blankets around my body, and placing warm packs on my chest and under my neck. I felt the shift from deadly cold to controlled heat, but it hurt in the way frostbite does when circulation begins to fight its way back. One medic checked my pupils, then looked toward Ramirez. "If you had arrived 10 minutes later, she might not be breathing." Ramirez swallowed hard. He kept his hand on my shoulder. "I am here, Hale. Stay awake. You made it this far. Do not stop now." My eyelids sagged, but a medic tapped gently near my jaw, forcing me to focus. "You cannot sleep yet, Sergeant. We need you alert. We are taking you to Guthrie." The MPs hovered nearby, forming a tight circle, scanning the area, scanning the windows, speaking into radios, asking for immediate lockdown procedures. Their voices blurred as the stretcher lifted beneath me. The snow swirled overhead in dizzying spirals. As the medics carried me toward the ambulance, one MP asked once more, firm but gentle, "Sergeant Hale, who did this to you?" I gathered the last bit of air left in my lungs. My voice cracked, but the words made it into the night. "My stepdad." He pushed me. The medics loaded me into the ambulance. Ramirez stepped back, but kept his eyes locked with mine. He nodded once, a silent promise that he would not let the truth disappear into the cold. Then the door shut and the sirens took over the night. The investigation began before the medics even finished warming my hands. While the ambulance forced its way through the ice-slick roads toward Guthrie Clinic, the MPs were already moving across the courtyard, marking footprints, photographing the broken window frame, and tracing the pattern in the snow where my body had fallen. Anything inside a military installation, especially involving a soldier, activated a chain of procedures that left no inch unexamined. By the time I was in a hospital gown under a thermal heater, CID had arrived at Building 102 with portable lights, evidence flags, and a level of precision that would have made my S1 section proud. One of the MPs, Sergeant Fuller, rode in the ambulance with me to get my initial statement. He kept his tone steady, careful not to overwhelm me, while my temperature crept upward, degree by degree. Hale listened carefully. "Did you know the individual who pushed you?" "Yes." My voice rasped out, barely audible. "My stepdad." Fuller nodded slowly. "We are going to confirm everything. Just try to breathe." The real storm, it turned out, was not outside the ambulance, but behind the gates of Fort Drum, where CID specialists combed through every piece of digital evidence the installation recorded. At Gate 10, around 30 minutes before the fall, a camera caught Alex's truck slowing, circling, then slipping through behind a departing vehicle. He never stopped at the checkpoint. He never showed ID. That alone triggered a federal violation because unauthorized entry onto an Army post is classified as a felony. The CID agent on duty, Chief Warrant Officer Landers, replayed the footage 3 times before grabbing a radio. "I want every gate alerted. That truck re-entered federal property without clearance. Find him." Outside Building 102, another camera mounted under an aging floodlight captured a figure hurrying away through the storm a few minutes after my fall. The footage was grainy, blurred by wind and snow, but the silhouette's movements were unmistakable. Shoulder hunched, head down, a quick glance over the shoulder before disappearing into the darkness. The timestamp aligned almost perfectly with the estimated time of my injury. CID enlarged the image, sharpened the contrast, and overlaid it with the footage from the gate. The outline of the coat, the build, the gait all matched. Inside the courtyard, CID agents knelt near the indentation my body had made in the snow. A trail of disturbed powder led from the alley where Alex must have approached the building. More prints circled the small patch of ground beneath the broken window. They measured the length and width of the impressions. Later, when civilian police obtained a pair of Alex's winter boots from his home, the tread matched the pattern under the window almost exactly. Meanwhile, at Guthrie Clinic, nurses inserted warm IV fluids into my arm while a doctor monitored my oxygen levels. My hearing returned in waves. Every now and then, I caught fragments of conversation from the hallway. CID is already on site. They are coordinating with Jefferson County. MP patrol teams are searching the perimeter. Someone mentioned that Base Command had requested an immediate freeze on outbound traffic until the situation was clarified. I drifted in and out, half conscious, half listening. Hours passed, the storm raged. And while the cold inside my bones slowly thawed, the cold truth about what happened that night hardened into something undeniable. Around dawn, CID and MPs drove to my mother's house. She answered the door with a look of confusion and fear when she saw uniforms on her porch. She kept tugging her robe tighter with each question they asked. Had she seen Alex that night? Did she know where he had gone? Did she know he had entered Fort Drum without authorization? At first, she shook her head, insisting she had been asleep. Fear made her voice unsteady. She was protecting him the way she always had. CID noticed. They had seen this pattern before. When they asked if she knew about our argument at dinner, her eyes shifted downward. When they asked if she understood the seriousness of the fall, her breath faltered. Then CWO Landers gently delivered the truth. "Ma'am, your daughter is lucky to be alive. She has told us she was pushed." The silence that followed stretched into something heavy, something that cornered my mother between loyalty and truth. Finally, she whispered what CID already suspected. She had heard Alex leave the house shortly after I walked out. She had called him once. He did not answer. He returned much later, angry and muttering that I needed to learn a lesson. She had not asked questions because asking questions always made things worse. When CID requested to inspect Alex's boots, she hesitated for only a fraction of a second before nodding. Meanwhile, civilian police located Alex at his brother's house. He appeared irritated at the early morning wake-up, not worried. He insisted he had done nothing wrong. When CID and Jefferson County detectives questioned him at the station, he repeated his claim with exaggerated confidence. "She tripped. She exaggerates everything. She always has. I tried to help her and she ran off." The detectives watched him calmly. Then they placed a photo in front of him. The photo showed the sole of his boot next to the print under the broken window. Identical. They placed another image. His truck entering the gate without authorization. Then one more. His silhouette walking away from Building 102 minutes after my fall. The shift in his expression was small but noticeable. Arrogance to confusion. Confusion to realization. His story no longer worked. Back at Guthrie, a CID agent interviewed me again once my temperature had stabilized. My voice remained hoarse, but steadier than the night before. I repeated everything. The dinner, the pursuit, the confrontation, the shove, the fall, the cold. When I said he pulled the curtain closed before leaving, the agent's jaw tightened. "You understand that is abandonment, correct?" "Yes. And you are certain he pushed you?" I closed my eyes and saw the moment in perfect clarity. The flash of anger, the impact of his hand, the window giving way. I opened them again. Yes. CID compiled their findings with the precision of a unit built for this work. The incident was now officially classified as an assault on an active duty service member on federal property. Civilian agencies prepared parallel charges. The snow outside continued falling, blanketing the installation in white. But inside the investigation rooms, the truth had already melted through every layer of denial Alex tried to build. What he had done could no longer be dismissed as a misunderstanding, an exaggeration, or a family argument gone too far. It was now evidence, and evidence does not melt. The public exposure did not happen slowly or quietly. It arrived like a blast of cold air through an open door sweeping across Fort Drum, across Watertown, and straight into the living rooms of the very people who once believed Alex was simply a strict father figure. By the time I was discharged from Guthrie and moved into temporary lodging on post, the chain of command had already made decisions about how to address what happened. The Army was not subtle when incidents threatened soldier safety, especially not on federal property. 2 days after the fall, my battalion called an early morning formation inside the drill hall, a large, echoing space normally used for ruck layouts and pre-field inspections. Nearly everyone had returned from holiday leave by then. Rows of soldiers in winter gear stood shoulder to shoulder, stamping their boots against the cold seeping up from the concrete floor. I watched from a designated seating area near the front, wrapped in a thick coat, my ribs still bruised, my lungs stinging each time I inhaled the cold air. My commander, Lieutenant Colonel Sharp, stepped forward, his uniform perfectly pressed, his posture taut with contained anger. He waited until the murmurs quieted before speaking. "This morning's brief concerns a serious breach of security and a threat to one of our NCOs." His eyes swept across the formation. 2 days ago, Sergeant Marissa Hale was pushed out a second-floor barracks window by a civilian who illegally entered this installation. The words struck the room like a thunderclap. Several soldiers exchanged stunned glances. Others straightened as if bracing for more. Sharp continued. Her fall could have been fatal. Temperatures were below -10 degrees. She was left alone on the ground for an extended period of time. Thanks to the actions of Staff Sergeant Ramirez and our first responders, she survived. A beat of silence followed. He inhaled sharply. "Let me be absolutely clear. One of our NCOs survived an attempted murder inside her own barracks." The phrase attempted murder hung in the air with a gravity that made the entire hall feel smaller. Soldiers stiffened. Whispers erupted in brief staccato bursts before quickly dying off. The commander held up the hand. "This is not a domestic dispute. This was a criminal act committed on Army property. Every soldier in this formation needs to understand the seriousness of what happened." He then shifted to the wider implications. New access protocols for older barracks buildings increased. MP patrols expedited badge checks at every gate until further notice. His voice lowered. "If any soldier here feels unsafe because of people outside this uniform, speak up. We protect our own." And then, unexpectedly, he turned toward me. "Hale, stand if you are able." Slowly, I rose my legs, trembling slightly from both injury and emotion. Hundreds of eyes turned in my direction, but this time, the weight of their attention did not crush me. Instead, it held me up. Sharp nodded once with respect rather than pity. "Your strength kept you alive. Your honesty ensured justice will follow. At ease." I sat back down, the air rushing from my lungs as the formation continued. The announcement did not stay contained within the base. It became news before sunrise. Local reporters loved stories involving military installations, especially when the headline wrote itself. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from a friend. "Check the Jefferson County Herald." The headline stretched across the top of the web page in bold letters. "Civilian breaks into Army barracks, assaults soldier." The article detailed the investigation unauthorized entry onto federal property forensic boot matches security footage placing Alex at the scene and the charges Jefferson County intended to file once he was transferred to civilian custody. There was a quote from CID confirming that the victim's injuries were consistent with a fall resulting from force rather than accident. Within hours, national military forums reposted the article. Comments flooded in. "How does a civilian even get into a barracks? That poor NCO? She could have died. Charge him with everything possible." Meanwhile, in Watertown, rumors sparked like dry branches. Neighbors who once nodded politely to my mother at the grocery store now whispered behind their carts. The story spread differently outside the base. There, people asked questions like, how could a mother allow this to happen, and why did she cover for him at the beginning? My mother called me 3 times in one afternoon. Each time, her voice sounded smaller than before. "People keep coming to the house with questions. I do not know what to say. They are acting like I did something wrong." I closed my eyes. Mom, they are reacting to the truth coming out. Not to you. She sniffed. But they look at me like I am the one who pushed you. Guilt clung to her words like frost. I did not know how to comfort her without reopening the wounds I had spent years burying. I told her the investigation would clarify everything that she needed to focus on her own safety now that Alex was gone. What I did not tell her was that the scrutiny she felt would only grow stronger. News stories had a way of turning complex situations into simple villains and simple victims. My mother did not fit neatly into either category. In the days that followed, Alex's relatives turned sharply against him. Some called the police themselves, offering statements about his temper, his drinking, his years of controlling behavior. Relatives who had spent Christmas dinner laughing at his jokes were now expressing shock to reporters, swearing they never imagined he was capable of such violence. Others remained silent, embarrassed to be associated with someone now labeled a threat to the military community. The contrast was jarring. The same people who once praised him for his strict demeanor now distanced themselves so quickly it left scorch marks. And while the world outside processed its outrage, the army closed ranks around me. Soldiers stepped into my workspace with questions, condolences, and fierce protective energy. Ramirez visited daily, sometimes just sitting quietly to make sure I was warm enough and drinking water. Another sergeant brought food. A private from down the hallway handed me a note that simply said, "You did not deserve this." The public exposure did more than reveal what Alex had done. It illuminated the difference between family that hurts you and community that holds you upright. Standing in that light, surrounded by soldiers and strangers who believed me without hesitation, I felt something unfamiliar, not relief, not justice, something steadier, a foundation forming beneath my feet, the beginning of a shift, a reclaiming. Because once the truth goes public, there is no going back to silence. The legal process unfolded with the same cold precision as the storm that nearly killed me, each step methodical, unavoidable, and sharper than the last. Once CID finalized their report and Jefferson County prosecutors reviewed the evidence, the list of charges against Alex grew from a handful of violations to a full-scale criminal case. The first charge was burglary into federal property. It did not matter that he entered through an unlocked door. What mattered was intent. He had crossed the gate without authorization and entered a secure military building. Under federal law, that alone carried significant penalties. The second charge, assault on an active-duty service member, carried even more weight. Because the assault occurred on a military installation and the victim was in uniformed service, civilian courts treated it with heightened seriousness. And then came the third and heaviest charge, attempted homicide. The prosecutor did not flinch when saying it. The fall from a second-floor window in below-zero temperatures, the injuries consistent with force. The abandonment afterward, they formed a pattern no defense attorney could soften into an accident. The day of the preliminary hearing, the courtroom felt colder than Guthrie had during those first hours of rewarming. I sat beside the prosecutor, my ribs wrapped with support bandages, my hands folded tightly to hide the tremor running through them. Ramirez sat behind me in uniform, along with 2 MPs who had been on scene that night. My commander attended as well, expression unreadable but resolute. When Alex entered the courtroom flanked by deputies, he did not look at me. He kept his chin high, as if ignoring the weight of the handcuffs binding him. My mother walked in moments later. Her steps were slow and hesitant. She did not go to him. She sat on the opposite side of the room, shoulders curled inward, hands wringing the sleeve of her coat. Her eyes were already red. The prosecutor began by presenting the investigative timeline. Gate camera footage played first Alex's truck slipping through behind another vehicle without stopping. His attempt to hide behind snow and darkness did not matter. Technology caught what he believed no one would see. Then, CID displayed the enhanced image from the Barracks camera. His silhouette walking away after my fall. The prosecutor paused the video at the moment the figure glanced back toward the window. Even grainy, the guilt in that posture was unmistakable. Then came the evidence markers, photos of the snow around the broken window, the boot prints, the match against the boots seized from his home. The courtroom murmured. The judge raised a hand to silence the reaction. My testimony came next. I stood slowly careful with my bruised ribs and recounted the dinner, the chase, the confrontation, the words he said before he shoved me. Every detail sharpened under the courtroom lights. I described the fall, the shock, the cold swallowing my limbs the moment I realized he had pulled the curtain closed instead of calling for help. My voice shook only once when I described the hallucination of my mother telling me not to sleep. The prosecutor allowed me a brief pause, then continued. When I finished, the courtroom was silent except for my mother's soft sobs. Then it was the defense's turn. Alex's attorney approached with a rehearsed look of sympathy. Miss Hale, is it possible you slipped on ice during an argument and your stepfather panicked? No, I answered before he finished. He tried a different angle. You were emotional when leaving the house. Is it possible your memory is influenced by stress or injury? I lifted my chin. No. He pushed me. The attorney took a breath, searching for another thread to pull, but there was nothing left. The evidence sealed every exit he might have tried. When the defense called Alex to speak, his performance was predictable. He claimed I tripped. He claimed he reached for me and I overreacted. He claimed he left the scene because he did not want to make things worse. But the prosecutor simply asked one question. Did you call 911? Alex hesitated. No. Did you check if she was alive? Another pause. No. Did you report the fall to anyone on base? No. The prosecutor stepped back. No further questions. My mother's sob escaped louder this time. She covered her mouth and tears streamed down her cheeks. She was not just crying for the hearing or the charges. She was crying because the truth she had ignored for years had finally taken shape in front of her. She had protected him out of fear, out of habit, out of hope that silence was safer than truth. Now she saw the cost of that silence in full daylight. During closing arguments, the prosecutor spoke with quiet intensity. This is not a misunderstanding. This is not family tension. This is a man who pursued a soldier onto federal property, forced his way into a barracks, shoved her out a second-floor window, and left her to die in sub-zero temperatures. Were it not for a fellow NCO returning early, we would be discussing a funeral today. The judge deliberated only briefly before delivering the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing came 1 week later. Alex stood rigidly as the judge read the punishment. For burglary on federal property, for assault on an active-duty service member, for attempted homicide resulting in severe hypothermia and potential permanent injury, this court sentences you to 12 years in state prison. My mother broke down completely, burying her face in her hands. I felt a heaviness lift from my shoulders, replaced by a strange, fragile quiet. Not triumph, not joy. Just a release I had waited more than a decade for without knowing it. Alex turned his head toward me, then, the first time in weeks he had looked directly at me. His eyes held no apology, only shock, only disbelief that control had finally slipped out of his hands. I did not look away. I wanted him to see the face of the woman who survived him. The deputies escorted him out, the metal door closed, and for the first time since Christmas Eve, the air around me felt warm. The strange thing about justice is that when it arrives, it rarely feels final. The courtroom door closes. The sentence is read. The offender is taken away, and yet some small corner of your mind keeps waiting for the next impact, the next outburst, the next manipulation. I thought a 12-year sentence would silence Alex forever. I thought the metal bars and concrete walls would finally place a boundary between his life and mine that he could not twist or break. But abusers do not surrender control. They reinvent it. They relocate it. And in his case, he mailed it. The letter arrived 3 weeks after sentencing. I had moved on to on-post housing by then, a small 2-bedroom duplex surrounded by quiet pine trees and the steady hum of military life returning to normal. I found the envelope wedged among utility statements and PX coupons. My stomach dropped the moment I saw his handwriting. Thick lines, sharp angles, the same pen pressure he used when signing permission slips with irritated impatience when I was a teenager. For a full minute, I just stared at it. My fingers prickled with the instinct to drop it straight into the trash, but something heavier. Curiosity, closure, dread held me in place. I went inside, shut the door, and sat at the kitchen table. The heater clicked softly. Snow tapped against the window like a familiar warning. I slid a finger under the sealed edge and opened the envelope. The letter inside was one page written in choppy sentences, the tone unmistakably his. Marissa, I heard about the sentence. 12 years. You did this. You ruined my life. But you owe me forgiveness. I raised you. I provided for you. You got where you are because of me. You are supposed to stand by your family. You need to write the judge. Tell them you exaggerated. Fix this. Do the right thing. I will wait for your apology. Nothing in the letter surprised me. Not the accusation, not the twisting of truth, not the entitlement. But one line repeated in my head until the words vibrated like a struck bell. You owe me forgiveness. The entitlement of it. The audacity. Even locked behind steel doors, he still believed he could assign me responsibility, dictate my reactions, reshape reality to protect his ego. It was the same voice that had stalked me out of the house on Christmas Eve, crossed into Fort Drum, forced his way into the barracks, and shoved me through a window. But I was not the same woman he pushed that night. I placed the letter on the table. My hands did not shake. Anger didn't rise. Fear didn't either. What came instead was clarity. A clean, quiet certainty that this moment was not a reopening of wounds. It was the final stitch. The last thread. I picked up the letter, walked to the back porch, stepped into the cold air, and held the page beneath a small metal lighter I kept from field exercises. The flame kissed the corner of the paper and spread quickly orange, licking through black ink. For a brief moment, the fire illuminated the snow around me warm against winter's chill. I watched the words curl fade and collapse into ash. Then I crushed what remained with the toe of my boot. I did not save a copy. I did not take a photo. I did not reread the letter. I did not let even a fragment survive. When I went back inside, the heater's hum felt steadier. The house felt brighter. And something inside my chest finally loosened. 2 days later, the prison chaplain sent a standard notice informing me that inmates sometimes attempt contact after sentencing and that I could request communication blocks if needed. I filled out the form without hesitation. No contact, no mail, no calls, no visitation requests, no apologies. He would not get another doorway into my life. When I mailed the form, the clerk behind the counter gave a small nod, the kind people give when they recognize strength in someone else's quiet actions. The moment I walked out of the post office, sunlight broke through the clouds and reflected off the snow so brightly that I had to shield my eyes. It felt like something symbolic, even if I didn't believe in signs. That week, I attended a mandatory follow-up appointment at Behavioral Health. The therapist, an Army civilian with soft eyes and a steady voice, asked whether I had experienced any further contact from Alex. I told her about the letter. I told her I burned it. She paused, then gave a satisfied nod. That was a protective act, she said. Not revenge, not denial. Protection. It hit me then how foreign that concept had been for most of my life. Me choosing what entered my mind, my space, my story. Me deciding the terms of my peace. Outside, therapy life moved forward with surprising ease. Soldiers from my battalion checked in on me. My commander encouraged me to take time to recover, but also reminded me that the Army still saw me as capable, not fragile. My mother called often. She apologized more than she spoke. She also mailed a letter much shorter than Alex's only 4 sentences long. I should have protected you. I am trying now. Please let me earn my place in your life again. I folded that letter gently and placed it in a drawer. I wasn't ready to answer, but I wasn't ready to burn it either. Not all endings required fire, but some did. And burning Alex's letter was the moment I understood that survival was not just something that happened in a courtyard under -10 degrees. Survival continued in the choices made afterward. Survival meant deciding what stayed, what left, and what could never return. Alex tried to break into my life one last time. I gave him nothing in return. Not anger, not forgiveness, not response, just silence. And silence, for once, belonged to me. Recovery did not arrive in a single moment of triumph. It came in slow inches, painful, stubborn, humbling inches. The morning after I burned Alex's letter, I reported back to Guthrie for my scheduled cold injury follow-up. The nurse checked the circulation in my hands and feet, pressing gently until color returned sometimes too slowly, sometimes not evenly. The doctor reviewed my chest x-rays, noting the bruising along my ribs and the lingering inflammation in my lungs from the hours my body spent fighting the cold. "You're healing well," he said, "but your recovery isn't just physical. Expect fatigue. Expect emotions to come in waves. Expect memories to surface when you don't want them to." He wasn't wrong. Physical therapy began the next week. The clinic assigned me to a therapist named Carol, a retired Army medic whose calm presence made even the hardest sessions bearable. He met me at the door with a clipboard in one hand and a booming voice that echoed off the tile floor. "Sergeant Hale, you survived something brutal. That means your body is going to bark at you for a while. Let it bark, then show it you're in charge." I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry, so I nodded and tried to stretch through the ache in my shoulders. Each session worked muscles that had stiffened during the fall and the long hours on the frozen ground. Therapy forced me to confront how fragile the body could become after shock and how resilient it could be once you pushed it with intention. The hardest part was the cold tolerance therapy. My fingertips and toes had taken the worst of the frost exposure. To prevent long-term nerve damage, I had to undergo controlled temperature exercises, warm soaks, alternating compresses, circulation drills. Sometimes the pain hit unexpectedly sharp and electric, a reminder of the night I spent waiting for rescue. The therapist never rushed me. He simply said, "Good. That means you're still here." My nights were different. Quiet. Too quiet. On-post housing was safer than the barracks in every way. Better locks, fewer people coming and going, a stronger sense of privacy. But safety had its own edges. It made room for thoughts that constant activity used to drown out. I found myself replaying the fall, the blur of the window frame breaking the punch of cold against my skin, the slow drain of strength as time stretched into something monstrous. I didn't cry often, but when I did, it wasn't from pain. It was from the realization that I had spent years shrinking myself to avoid triggering a man who would have let me die in the snow. A month after the incident, behavioral health asked if I wanted to begin EMDR, a therapy for trauma processing. I agreed. The first session was harder than I expected. The therapist guided me through the memory slowly, allowing my mind to reconstruct it without the panic spiraling out of control. It felt like opening a door I had braced shut for weeks. But on the other side of that door was not weakness, it was strength I hadn't acknowledged yet. And each week, the memory loosened its grip. Halfway through January, my commander called me into his office. I arrived expecting a routine check-in, but he closed the door behind me and gestured toward a folder on his desk. "Hale, the battalion nominated you for an award." My eyebrows lifted. "Sir," respectfully. "For what I did not do anything except survive." He shook his head. "You survived something no one should. You helped MP and CID investigators by giving one of the clearest statements I've ever seen under trauma. And without your cooperation, the offender might have slipped through legal gaps." He slid the folder toward me. Inside was a certificate recommendation for the Army Commendation Medal. My throat tightened. I traced the embossed seal with my thumb. I had never imagined receiving a medal for something so personal, so painful. But Sharp wasn't done. This isn't just for surviving. This is for standing up, for refusing to let this disappear. For every soldier in this battalion who needs to know that speaking up is strength, not shame. When the award ceremony arrived, I stood in the battalion headquarters wearing my Class A uniform ribs still tender beneath the fabric. Soldiers filled the room, Ramirez in the front row, the MPs who had found me, the medics who treated me, even junior soldiers from my company who had heard my story and wanted to be there. My commander pinned the medal onto my uniform with deliberate care. Cameras clicked softly. The moment felt surreal, not because of the recognition itself, but because I realized the one thing Alex could never understand: strength is not control. Strength is not fear. Strength is survival and truth and community. After the ceremony, Ramirez approached me with a grin. "You did good, Hale." "Damn good." I smiled back. "Thank you for saving my life, Staff Sergeant." He shook his head. "No, you kept yourself alive long enough for me to find you. That was you." His words stayed with me. They became a quiet refrain each time I doubted myself. By February, I was cleared to return to light duty. The first morning I stepped back into the S1 shop, my coworkers greeted me with a warmth that melted something inside my chest. They had rearranged my desk to be closer to the window. More sunlight, they said, better view, better feeling. It was a small gesture that meant more than they knew. Life began weaving itself back into a pattern, but it was not the same pattern as before. It was steadier, brighter, mine. My mother called often. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she apologized, sometimes she just listened to my voice as if that alone reassured her I was still here. Healing our relationship was slow, unsteady work, but I finally allowed myself to see her not as an accomplice to my pain, but as someone trapped in her own. I wasn't ready to rebuild everything, but I was ready to start with small steps. Spring arrived slowly in the North Country. Snow melted into long streams along the sidewalks. Birds returned to the pine trees outside my duplex. One afternoon, while placing new soil into a small pot of flowers beside my doorway, I realized something that made my breath catch. I was no longer living in survival mode. I was living, simply living, and that was enough. One evening, after a long PT session and a quiet dinner alone, I sat near my window watching the sunset cast gold light over Fort Drum. That was when the words formed simple, undeniable. I did not fall out that window. I rose from it. The woman who hit the snow that night was not the woman standing in that room now. The night could have taken everything from me. Instead, it revealed who I truly was. Before turning off the light, I picked up my journal and wrote the closing lines for the story I would eventually share with the world. If you've ever survived a cold that wasn't weather, tell me your story. Someone needs your strength. Then I closed the book, and for the first time in my life, the darkness in the room felt warm.